Tems A&D Nigeria's new wave, ARE, rewriting the rules of music ownership. For decades, the path for a breakout African artist looked the same. Get discovered, sign whatever major label deal is on the table, and hope the fine print doesn't quietly sign away everything you actually own. Ownership of your masters, your publishing, your name traded away for the exposure a global label promised to provide. Tems just publicly said the quiet part out loud. Her career has taught her to be intentional about the business side of music, specifically naming ownership of her masters as central to that mindset. And she's not the only one. A new generation of Nigerian artists is quietly renegotiating the entire relationship between African talent and the global music industry, and the terms are shifting in ways that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. The old model A&D, why it broke to understand what's changing. You have to understand the deal African artists were traditionally offered, and why it stopped making sense the moment Afrobeats actually became a global commercial force. Afrobeats streams on Spotify grew nearly 500% between 2017 and 2022, and by that year, the genre had racked up more than 13 billion streams in a single 12-month period. That's not a niche scene anymore, that's a legitimate global commercial engine. And yet, for years, the leverage stayed almost entirely with international labels and distributors, because they controlled the thing Nigerian artists needed most: access to global playlists, sync deals, and distribution infrastructure that simply didn't exist locally at scale. There's also a structural problem underneath the deals themselves. Nigeria's Copyright Act of 2022 does grant artists exclusive legal rights to reproduce, distribute, and monetize their work on paper, but legal experts have pointed out that meaningful intellectual property protection often falls short in practice, leaving a real gap between what the law promises and what artists can actually enforce when a deal goes sideways or a foreign platform underpays. That gap is precisely what made international labels' offers so tempting for years. Even an imperfect major label deal often felt safer than fighting for royalties through a domestic system still catching up to the genre's global growth. Tems herself is a useful lens for how quickly the ceiling on what's achievable has moved. She became the first Nigerian artist to win 2 Grammy Awards, has landed 2 top 10 Billboard Hot 100 hits including a #1, and has racked up 10 top 10 entries on the Billboard US Afrobeats Songs chart, including 2 chart toppers. Those aren't just personal career milestones, they're proof points that reset what a Nigerian artist could plausibly negotiate for. Because a label courting an artist with that kind of track record is negotiating from a very different position than a label courting an unknown act with no international chart history at all. The new playbook. So, what does the new approach actually look like in practice? It's less about rejecting major labels entirely, and more about renegotiating exactly what gets signed away. Tems is the clearest example. Rather than simply accepting a standard deal structure, she's been explicit about building what she calls ecosystem structures designed for long-term growth, not just a single artist's next release cycle. In August, she opened applications for the Leading Vibe initiative, a professional development program offering training, legal representation, and mentorship specifically aimed at getting more African women into the business side of the industry, not just the performing side. She partnered with Hennessy and Native Instruments to fund and resource it, and she's since joined Native Instruments' Artist Advisory Board, alongside major established names like Alicia Keys and Jacob Collier, a seat at the table that's about influence over how the tools and infrastructure of the industry get built, not just about her own catalogue. Nigerian labels themselves have also started restructuring how they engage with global majors, rather than simply handing over control. When Universal Music Group invested in Lagos-based label Mavin, home to stars like Rema and Ayra Starr, the terms were notably different from the old extraction model. Universal explicitly stated that Mavin's day-to-day operations would remain unchanged, with founder Don Jazzy and COO Tega Ogene Jobo continuing to run the label themselves. That's a meaningfully different arrangement than a foreign label simply acquiring Nigerian talent and folding it into an existing corporate structure. It's closer to a genuine partnership, with the local label retaining operational control while gaining access to global reach. Distribution models have shifted too. Empire's Africa arm has built its reputation specifically on giving artists like Tems and Omah Lay direct access to digital streaming platforms without the layers of traditional gatekeeping, positioning itself as an infrastructure partner rather than an owner of the art itself. That distinction matters enormously. Infrastructure access without ownership transfer is a fundamentally different value proposition than the licensing arrangements that defined earlier decades of the industry. Ownership beyond the music itself. Here's where this story gets genuinely interesting, because the ownership conversation isn't staying contained to masters and publishing rights anymore, it's expanding into entirely different asset classes. In February, Tems announced she'd bought a stake in San Diego FC, a Major League Soccer club that entered the league this year. That's not a vanity purchase or a celebrity endorsement deal, it's direct equity ownership in a sports franchise, an asset class that appreciates independently of streaming numbers, radio play, or any single hit song's performance. It signals a fundamentally different mindset than the old model of an artist simply cashing checks from label advances, building a diversified portfolio of owned assets that doesn't evaporate the moment a music career's commercial peak passes. This mirrors a broader pattern showing up across the wider Afrobeats and Amapiano wave, as international labels and investors increasingly see genuine long-term commercial value in the genre, rather than treating it as a temporary trend to license and move past. The artists and executives driving that growth are negotiating from a position that simply didn't exist for the generation before them. Rema's breakout success, over 1 billion Spotify streams and a record-breaking 57-week run on the Billboard Hot 100, didn't just make him a star. It gave an entire generation of Nigerian artists concrete, unambiguous proof that the genre could generate real global commercial value, which is exactly the kind of leverage that shifts negotiating power at the table. Why this matters beyond one genre. What's happening in Nigeria's music scene isn't just a regional story, it's a preview of how emerging market creative industries are learning to negotiate with global infrastructure on fundamentally different terms than previous generations did. The old assumption was that access to global platforms required surrendering ownership in exchange. What Tems and her peers are demonstrating is that access and ownership don't actually have to be mutually exclusive. You can build genuine infrastructure, mentor the next generation directly, and diversify into completely unrelated asset classes, all while retaining meaningful control over your own core catalogue. That's a fundamentally different value proposition than simply being a talented artist waiting to get discovered and signed by whoever offers the biggest advance. There's also a compounding effect worth noting. Platforms specifically built to help African creators collect royalties from previously inaccessible global sources: film, TV, social media licensing. Sync deals across dozens of countries are actively closing the monetization gap that used to force artists into unfavorable deals just to get paid at all. One such platform now represents a catalogue spanning thousands of titles across Afrobeats, gospel, and R&B, collecting income from dozens of paying sources across well over 100 countries, which matters enormously for artists whose music travels far beyond markets where they have any direct relationship with a licensee. As that infrastructure keeps maturing, the pressure on major labels to offer genuinely fair terms rather than extraction-heavy deals only increases, because artists increasingly have real, viable alternatives to a bad contract. Tems ending 2025 as Nigeria's most streamed woman on Spotify and one of its most exported artists globally isn't just a chart statistic, it's the commercial proof point behind everything she's actually been building. Streaming success bought her leverage. She's using that leverage to buy structural ownership, mentor the next wave of women coming up behind her, and diversify into assets that have nothing to do with music at all. The old rules said, talent gets you signed. The new rules, being written in real time by Tems and Nigeria's new wave. Say talent gets you leverage, and what you do with that leverage is the part that actually determines whether you end up owning your career or just renting it, decade after decade, from whoever holds the paperwork. If you want to see how Burna Boy and Rema's own ownership battles compare to what Tems is building right now, make sure you're subscribed, because this shift across the entire Afrobeats and piano wave is only accelerating from here.